Two army units, one British and one German, arrive in Italy. They are to fight each other face to face in one of the biggest and most controversial battles of the Second World War.
We were all glad to get away from there. The whole division was never the same anymore after that.
We were robbed of the best thing in life, our youth. That's what we lost.
These are some of the true stories of that fight, told by the men of both sides who took part in this extraordinary 5-month conflict. Described as an act of insanity, it became known as the Battle of Monte Cassino. By 1944, the war has begun to turn in the Allies' favor, and Germany is now on the defensive. In the town of Cassino, south of Rome, German paratroopers enjoy a drink of schnapps, unaware of what's about to hit them. They're holed up in reinforced cellars as part of the gigantic Gustav line that crosses Italy. For over 2 months, the Allies have been unable to break this defensive line. Now they are to resort to a massive air attack on the Germans in the town. It's a desperate move.
We could see the aeroplanes. They came nicely lined up like a chain, one squadron after the other, glinting in the sunlight. You could see the bomb hatches open and you could see the bombs falling.
For over 3 hours, Allied bombers drop 1,000 tons of bombs on the town of Cassino and the German paratroopers inside. Around 5 tons of explosive for every soldier.
We sat in the cellar. Funnily enough, there was a deathly silence. Nobody said a word. We thought, hopefully, that the roof wouldn't collapse, and about what would happen after. We knew that, of course. This was the preparation for an attack to follow.
In reality, the bombing reduced the town to a mass of craters, making it easier for the German paratroopers to defend. But this was not the first time the Allies had attempted to bomb their way to Rome. Only 4 weeks earlier, they'd initiated one of the most controversial acts of the whole war. The battlefield was the town of Cassino and the hills that tower above it. A month before the bombing of the town, one hill had become the focus of the conflict: Monte Cassino, the 1,700-foot mountain that dominates the area. The Allies had become fixated by the mountain and the Benedictine monastery that crowns the summit. This imposing complex was the foremost monastery in Europe, but it found itself in a very difficult position. It also overlooked the main road to Rome. Surrounded by a network of minefields, bunkers, and machine gun nests, this was the most crucial point in the German Gustav line, extending through the mountains 100 miles across Italy. Frustrated by the strength of these German defenses, the Allies have resorted to a simple but devastating solution. They are to completely destroy it. They believe the heavily fortified monastery may be being used by German troops. It isn't. This is the start of probably the worst point of Allied leadership in the war. For 4 hours, over 250 bombers unload one of the biggest concentration of bombs ever to be dropped on a single target.
I watched the bombing of the monastery. It was very impressive, and I think justified the overused word awesome. It really was.
But like the bombing in the town, the destruction of the monastery is a spectacular disaster. German troops quickly occupy the ruins, and the monastery is turned into a fortress.
Da war für mich die Welt irgendwo am Ende. Und ich möchte sagen,
I felt the world was at its end.
trat dann ein Widerstand in Aktion,
I think the destruction made us all the more determined.
Der uns befähigt,
We now felt we had to defend here more than we ever thought previously.
als wir nur uns bisher vorgestellt haben.
Both bombings were meant to soften up the positions to make them easier to attack. Both did the opposite. It seems as if the Allied commanders have little idea of the terrain or the strength of the German defences. Previous attempts to go around the monastery or attack it from the rear had failed. Now, short of new ideas, they're going to try to take the most strongly defended German position head on. Allied forces in Italy have bombed the town of Cassino and the monastery above. They've been trying to break the German defences there for over 2 months and move north towards Rome. But the German positions have proved too strong. Now, both sides have sent in fresh troops. Among the multinational force that will make the next attack is the 1st 4th Essex Battalion.
They were real steadfast comrades. They all kept together and helped one another. They were very, very good pals. And when you lost one of those chaps, that hit you.
Unlike many other fighting units, most of the men of the Essex Battalion had signed up well before the war began.
Well, they were a remarkable lot of chaps. They were all volunteers. They were largely East Enders of London. There was B Company, they were called Swedes, Swede-bashers. They were rural people and fishermen and longshoremen. There was tremendous comradeship.
Having served together for at least 5 years, the Essex Battalion, now settled in rock shelters near the town, had become one of the most seasoned fighting units in the British Army. But they had never been in such a difficult position as this before.
We kept on hearing about this place called Cassino. We thought, oh, little Billy's never heard of it, you know, and we thought, oh, they should soon take that. When we saw what was in front of us, we thought that'd be a hopeless task.
Facing them in the ruins and in the hills were some of the toughest and most respected fighting men in the German army. Widely regarded as Germany's elite corps, the paratroopers had taken over the job of holding the Gustav line at all costs.
Die Fallschirmtruppe, als ich dann hinkam und habe gesehen, was das für war.
When I came to the Paras, I saw what sort of men they were. They didn't give way, they didn't waver. Where they were put, they stood. They had an incredible attitude, cold-blooded.
Körperlich sowieso.
I would have been drafted anyway, so I volunteered for the paratroopers. I didn't want to end up in a unit with married people or older people where they say, "You do the shooting, I'll go and get the food." The paratroopers were all volunteers, and you were proud to wear the paratroopers badge.
Wie ich Fallschirmjäger wurde, da saß ich gerade in einem Zug, bei dem zwei Lanzer aus Russland.
Before I joined the paratroopers, I sat in a train with 2 infantry soldiers who had fought in Russia. One of them said to me, "You want to join the paratroopers? Have you already killed your father and your mother?" This is what people thought about the paratroopers.
Early 1944 is a crucial time in the war for both sides. Germany has lost North Africa and the campaign against Russia is collapsing. The US has joined the war in Europe and the Allies are planning the attack in France that will soon be known as D-Day. Meanwhile, Churchill has persuaded a reluctant America to take part in an attack up through Italy, what he described as the soft underbelly of Europe. It's anything but. And the Americans now believe they've been duped by the British into a hellish sideshow. As Italy surrendered, Germany quickly occupied and reinforced the country against the Allies. And the Gustav line is proving to be their most effective defensive position, the line the Allies cannot cross. Both sides know that a much bigger Allied attack is brewing in Northern Europe, and the outcome of this battle could have far-reaching consequences. Hitler hoped that a successful defense in Italy would mean that the Allies would think twice about D-Day. For the Allies, this is the biggest combined attack they've mounted so far, and their greatest test. The German command structure was simple, their task to hold the line. In contrast, the Allies had a complex multinational chain of command, with over a dozen different nations involved, and much disagreement. Now it was the turn of the New Zealanders to lead the next offensive, together with Indian and British troops. The plan is for the New Zealanders to attack the town, and an Indian brigade, led by the 1st 4th Essex, to move up to the castle overlooking it. From there, they would start their assault on the mountain, first to Hangman's Hill, then on to the monastery. The task of attacking the ruined monastery head-on, up the steep mountainside, fills some of the men with dread.
We were told what was going to happen, and I remember Major Beasley saying it's going to be a frontal attack. Well, I just remember laughing at that and saying frontal attack, and I thought he was joking. He said nobody would be stupid enough to make a frontal attack. That's where we will surprise the enemy.
Despite many misgivings, the plan goes ahead. The Essex Battalion clambers up the steep, craggy slope towards their start point at the castle. But they're also under enemy fire, and the climb becomes deadly.
We were going upside of that castle hill, and pitch black, and there's shelling and machine gunning that was going on, slipping and sliding. Oh, it was horrendous. It was really horrendous.
The New Zealand engineers laid white tapes for us to follow. Because of the shelling, the tapes got blasted apart, and you followed the tape and then you suddenly come to nothing, and you didn't know where the other end was, so you didn't know whether you were still facing the same direction.
It was nothing to lose, men, just through falling down over the rocks. It happened time and time again. Men disappeared. In the total dark, it was so sheer down over this side.
I went up on my own to the castle to assure the New Zealanders that we were indeed coming and to make sure they could find how we were going to get into this place, because it wasn't a very sensible thing to arrive with your company straggled behind you and not quite know where the door is, you know.
Almost 6 hours after they'd set off, the last of the Essex reached the castle. But it was a bad start, as many had been lost on the climb. And the rest of the Indian Brigade that were meant to follow the Essex fared even worse. 2 companies have become hopelessly lost, a third is pinned down by German fire, and a Gurkha company has simply disappeared into the dark.
We got into the castle. There were, I think, half a dozen or so New Zealanders standing guard over about the same number of prisoners. And they said, "What's taken you so long, Cobber?" We told him, and they said, "Well, here's your castle, don't lose it."
In the cold light of the next day, the effect of the bombing on the town is becoming all too clear. The New Zealand tanks have been slowed to a crawl or stopped altogether by the craters. German paratroopers are defending every square inch of the ruined town, and the fighting is now ferocious, house to house, ruin to ruin.
Wenn die eingedrungen waren, dann ging es nur mit Maschinengewehren.
When they attacked, you just used your machine guns, which you positioned on your hip. And then you stormed towards their positions or ran after them when they started to waver or tried to run back. It was a terrible business.
War eine fürchterliche Angelegenheit.
The fighting in the town was extremely close. It wasn't uncommon for enemy troops to occupy the same ruined house, sometimes unaware of each other's presence. Prisoners were inevitable.
Zunächst haben sich immer gewundert, dass wir nicht anders aussahen.
The British were always astonished that we did not look different to them. This was the funniest thing about the whole situation. They said, "For heaven's sake, you've all got English faces."
All English faces.
Of course, what we were supposed to look like.
This was often the only time that men came face to face with their enemy. It exposed just how differently they saw their own situations.
Die kamen eines Morgens angezogen.
We had taken a British officer prisoner. On the next day, we talked about who would win the war. He was certain that the Allies were going to win. And this is when I said, "You're not going to get through our defenses in France. We are going to smash your ships to pieces, you'll see. You're not even going to step 1 foot on land." Well, this is what I thought. In any case, he wanted to give me his address, but he was somehow upset and almost offended when I did not accept it. Then I said, "What am I supposed to do with the address of an English prisoner after we've won the war?"
After 2 days of fighting, the Germans have now halted the attack on almost every front. They've worked out the Allies' plan. It's now increasingly clear that in this battle, one battered pile of stones is becoming more important than all the others. The Allies' weak point is the castle. It's the key to their attack on the closed door to Rome. Almost the entire Allied attack is being funneled through the castle, and if the Germans can take it back, then they will directly overlook the town and hold the Allies' supply route. The attack on Monte Cassino will therefore be doomed. Despite their setbacks, the Allied commanders planned to renew the attack the next day. Surprisingly, one of the missing Indian companies had reappeared, and some of the Gurkhas had made it through the night all the way to Hangman's Hill. That night, the 4 Essex companies holed up in and around the castle were ordered to move out and strengthen the attack. The Essex men prepared to leave the castle and begin the attack on the hills above.
How they were going to get troops from Hangman's Hill to attack the monastery was a problem. To attack from Hangman's Hill, in my opinion, was going to be a disaster.
It was clear that for the Allies, everything depended on this one moment. But this was also the moment that the Germans were about to launch their counterattack.
Ich glaube, das war vor dem Angriff auf Roccananula.
I think before the attack on Castle Hill, we all had something to eat and everybody was given another bottle of schnapps. We didn't drink the entire bottle, but we had a good gulp. And the effect was that you felt a bit happier afterwards. It's like the saying, a real hero is a drunk or an idiot.
Oder ein Idiot, so sagt man immer.
Now the first of the Essex companies are moving up towards Hangman's Hill and the monastery beyond. At the same time, paratroopers are carefully moving down the same slope to attack the castle. Neither is expecting to find the other in their path.
We made our way forward to Hangman's Hill. I think we'd only gone about half an hour, and we heard voices.
It was a strange feeling, because we had to be as silent as possible, because on the other side of this ravine there was an Indian brigade, and if we made too much noise, we would have come under fire from them, and that would not have been good for us or for our mission, because that would have revealed that reinforcements were coming to the area.
Für dieses Gebiet.
Somebody fired a very light, and that showed up the numbers that were coming down from Monastery Hill. We were firing. Then I remember my rifle being jammed on about 3 rounds, and it jammed. I couldn't use it, and I thought I'll have to make my way somewhere else. It's still pitch black, and as I came, this grenade came over. That put pay to me. That was my finish with the 4th Essex.
The Allies had started a new attack on German defences at Monte Cassino in Italy. But just as the Essex battalion led the move up the mountain, they were hit by a strong counterattack. Now the paratroopers fight on towards the castle, occupied by the rest of the Essex men.
About half a dozen chaps came running back down the hill and told us that the Germans were on their way to attack us. Very shortly afterwards, considerable fire swept the area from various directions.
Ich war MG-Schütze, hatte mein MG und mein...
I was a machine gunner, and I had my second gunner with me who carried the ammunition. And we ran and fired.
Ja, man hört nur Maschinengewehr und Schüsse und so weiter.
You only heard machine guns and shooting. And of course you could also hear screams and shouting. Not just machine gun fire.
Dauernd Trommelfeuer.
As the German counterattack continues towards the castle, many wounded are left behind, in enemy territory.
Dawn started breaking. My left arm was in tatters really, the leg and chin, and I was losing blood and feeling a bit faint. And I see the troops come down and make their way towards the castle. And I thought, I daren't move. The best way is to act as a dead body. It seemed to me ages that I was lying there, but I knew I had to have immediate treatment. I saw 2 German stretcher bearers come along and asked for help. A German stretcher bearer tied a tourniquet in the arm and a splint on the leg and bandage around the chin. We'd done a good job.
At 7 o'clock, the paratroopers attack again. But this time, the Indian Brigade headquarters on the next hill is ready. The Germans run straight into a wall of machine gun fire.
A comrade of mine had his belly torn open by grenade fragments. There was nothing to be done. We knew the only thing was for him to have morphine injections. We covered the wound with his jumpsuit and tightened his belt because we could not bandage it up. He wanted to shoot himself, but his pistol did not work. It had also been hit by a grenade fragment. Otherwise, he would have shot himself. He tried to. Such things are not nice, but they happened, alas. It was war, and in war everything is possible.
Es war Krieg, und im Krieg ist alles möglich.
The attack subsides. The area around the castle is now littered with dead. But the men inside remain under siege.
The German snipers were very, very good. And there was one who got a beeline through a crack in the wall, and he didn't miss many shots. He fired at one of the Bren gunners. They killed him.
Another man then came forward as a volunteer and said he'd take over. And he too was shot. So then there was a third man who was, I should think, a countryman. He said he would man this position. And then he very, very gently moved across without moving his rifle, which would otherwise glitter sometimes if the light was like that. And he waited for the other sniper he was looking at to make the false move.
We don't know for sure, but after he'd fired, the sniper never fired through anymore, so we can only assume that he got the sniper. He got the military medal for that.
The Allies need to regain control of the area in front of the castle if the attack is to continue. The commanders send orders for the remaining men inside to move out and help. The men on the ground see the situation very differently.
I felt this was a mistake because the castle was without any doubt the most important piece of ground in the battle at that time. So I got on to battalion headquarters and put forward my views on this, and they accepted. That was the right thing to do.
Major Beckett decided that he would use all the troops that were left to make it a strong point.
Later in the morning, another attack is made on the castle, but now with little chance of success. The German assaults seem increasingly suicidal. Out of the 200 men who began the counterattack, only 40 now remain.
Wir kamen bis zur unteren Haarnadel.
We came as far as the lower hairpin bend, and there we encountered heavy fire from the ruins of the castle and realized that we could not reach the castle with so few men.
The Essex are also in a bad state. Major Beckett is now the only officer left in the castle.
One of our soldiers had been wounded outside the castle, and I went out with the Red Cross flag. Nobody attempted to shoot me. When we got this chap back into the castle, I stood up and, I suppose somewhat theatrically, saluted the people up the hill, because it's, I suppose, a form of thank you.
One of my memories of hearing chaps screaming and crying in agony outside of that castle, and no one could get to them. That was not a nice thing.
The 3 attacks had caused an incredible body count. Now, in the middle of battle, 2 Germans are spotted approaching the castle with a Red Cross flag. The 2 sides are to meet face to face.
Firing died down, and there was a very great German come up, smoking a cigar, waving a flag. He come right up to the courtyard. We want a truce to bury our dead and so forth.
He was a big chap, and he had a cigar case. I can't remember whether he offered me one or not, but I certainly didn't accept it because I very seldom smoke cigars.
They got so many wounded outside their own positions that they wanted to collect them in. Major Beckett, he got through to battalion headquarters.
Thank you. It was no more of a surprise than all the other surprises we'd had. It was not something I'd experienced before, but there were certainly a lot of bodies to be moved.
An armistice is arranged, and after days of intense and bloody warfare, a peace descends in the area around the castle.
It took a while to get used to. Without grenades and explosions. This was a real surprise, because we hadn't had that for days. We'd had uninterrupted firing, and the banks were part of that.
It didn't matter what you was picking up with that German, Indian, New Zealand or English, whatever, it didn't matter. If it was a wounded person, they picked them up and brought them back into the castle. And the Germans went back and they done the same in their own area.
The Germans were very good. They were out there trying to get the casualties out, the same as we were. One Jerry helped me a lot. He could speak English, and he helped me put them on a stretcher, and we got them back inside the castle.
Some of the stretcher bearers were weak too. Sometimes they had to carry wounded over rocks and steep descents, all roped up. They stopped where we were, put down the stretchers, and we exchanged cigarettes.
Zigarette? Zigarette.
I think that the war in the south against the English and the American units was, I would say, not really hate. He was the enemy. Everyone had to do their duty. He was on his side of the front, we were on our side. And I think the suffering was the same.
Oi. Chocolate. Danke. Danke. Thanks.
Because of the very strange situation in this part of the battlefield, we had somehow the feeling that they were like comrades, because they went through the same things.
Part of the whole curious experience of being in combat was you could have an intimate relationship with your enemies under certain circumstances, and at another time you could quite cheerfully shoot them. It was a conundrum because the human side kept coming through.
After half hour it just stopped. There was a shell went over. I think it was one of our 25-pounders, because it started off again. And we're back to square one till the end of it.
As the truce came to an abrupt end, both sides withdrew to their previous positions and back to the gory business at hand. Against all odds, over 300 Gurkhas and 70 Essex men had made it to Hangman's Hill, but their ability to attack the monastery is hanging in the balance. They've been cut off by the German counterattack and are now suffering badly from the effects of shell fire and a lack of food, water and ammunition. Agonizingly, the men who are now only 250 meters from the monastery cannot attack until they receive new supplies.
You only went out there with the minimum rations, expecting everything to come up as they thought everything would follow on. Well, it never followed on. So during that week, they were dropping parachute food for obviously the Indians and the Gurkhas and us. But you had to risk your life to get out and get it. And a lot of the time, you found that what you did retrieve was chapatis for the Indians, which wasn't our type of food.
We see these things coming down, and we thought that, well, I thought they were bombs coming down, but they were containers with supplies of food in. But there was hardly any of them fell in the Gurkha position. They nearly all fell in the German positions.
Das war eine sehr schwierige Situation, da inzwischen sich auch der Hunger bemerkt.
It was a very difficult situation because we became very hungry and thirsty. And since our supplies were less than plentiful, there was much effort to locate parachutes that had drifted off target. And I would say that we captured a large proportion of the things that were dropped.
Sleep you were very short of. One would sleep and one would stay awake, but it was jolly difficult. And sometimes when tragedies occurred, both of them had been dozing, and they were awakened when a grenade landed in their hull and finished them both off. And that did happen.
There was no question of sleep. We slept a few minutes at a time, but always with your finger on the trigger. The slightest noise you woke up again. The tension was always there.
On the 20th of March, it was clear that the frontal attack on the monastery was over. And in the town below, little progress was being made against the paratroopers. For the Germans, the crisis was over. They had correctly worked out that the castle was the weak point in the Allied plan, and although they'd sacrificed almost an entire battalion of paratroopers trying to take it and not succeeded, they had stopped the Allied attack.
Was I pleased to hear, in the end, after I spoke to Major Beckett on the 5th day, I say, we're getting a bit of a state up here. I said, so he said, well, between you and I, he said, we are pulling out tonight.
What remained of the 1st 4th Essex Battalion made their way back down Castle Hill, the same precarious route they had struggled up 5 days earlier.
We handed over the castle intact. We never lost it, and so we had achieved our mission in that sense. And when the New Zealanders said, now you've got it, make sure you don't lose it, we could say, well, we haven't.
Each company had gone up the hill with around 65 men. Some now returned with just a handful. Of the 400 men who had hidden for days in foxholes and bomb craters on Hangman's Hill, just over half made it back. German losses were almost as bad. The Battle of Monte Cassino was starting to take a place alongside some of the most notorious battles of the First World War.
Once, while I was crawling around on the ground, I found a book, a German book. I read the text, and it said, there are two forces in the world. One is the spirit, and the other one is the sword. But never has the sword prevailed over the spirit. And I wiped away the dust on the book cover, and it said, The Battle of the Somme.
Die Schlacht an der Somme.
The Gustav line had held, for now. But the biggest battle was still to come. For 4 months, the Allies have tried but failed to smash the German defences at Monte Cassino. Now they're to try again. the German paratroopers wait patiently for the next attack.
Wir hofften immer auf geheime Waffen.
We were always hoping for secret weapons, and we knew that we needed time and had to win time. This was agreed by everyone. We needed time.
As all other fronts were failing, the defense of Monte Cassino had now gained huge psychological significance for the Germans.
Zu diesem Grammophon hatten wir 2 Schallplatten. Und diese 2 Platten waren...
We had a gramophone, but we had only 2 songs. One of the songs was called Besame Mucho.
Diese beiden Platten haben wir Tag und Nacht.
We would continuously wind the gramophone up and play the record again and again.
Und abgespielt.
Once, right at the beginning, we received heavy artillery because of the music, but it hardly damaged our quarters. Afterwards, we took the gramophone with us in the basement and used it there. I think by then, even the enemy enjoyed the music.
May the 11th, 1944. The regular shelling has almost stopped, and an eerie silence has fallen over the valley and the hill of Monte Cassino.
Auf einmal war alles ruhig.
Everything was quiet. There was no artillery, no fire, nothing at all. You knew that something was about to happen. You could practically feel it.
The 4 exhausted German divisions defending the Gustav line are completely unaware of the 13 divisions that have now been secretly built up against them.
Und dann auf einmal 11 Uhr abends.
And suddenly, at 11 p.m., it was as if someone had put on all the lights. Everything was bright and we could see all the mountains towards Naples.
By the morning, Allied and German troops were now engaged in a battle 23 miles wide. But as before, the area around the monastery at Monte Cassino is the scene of the toughest fight. After 3 days of fighting, 1,500 paratroopers are still holding the ground around the monastery against tens of thousands of Polish troops. But during the evening of May the 16th, it becomes clear to the German command that Allied successes elsewhere on the line mean the monastery will soon be surrounded. The order is given for the paratroopers to withdraw.
Das kann gar nicht sein.
That can't be. We can't withdraw. Withdrawal, that's a sign of weakness. We have to stand here against the enemy. A withdrawal, that was like a lost battle.
Despite the paratroopers' reluctance, the monastery is abandoned. 4,000 Poles have become casualties in their bid to take Monte Cassino, but when the attackers reach the summit, they find only wounded men.
We didn't know at first who entered the monastery. All of them had the same uniforms. When they entered, we figured out that they were Poles, and naturally we were not too pleased about that. We thought that they may want to take revenge on us. However, we talked with them, and they treated us quite well.
Die haben uns ganz gut behandelt.
Rome is liberated. The Gustav line is broken and the Battle of Monte Cassino is over. But it now seems a hollow victory. The American Fifth Army has defied orders to cut off the retreating Germans and instead sent troops into the undefended streets of Rome, fearing that the British might get there first. Mistrust in the coalition is still rife. And only one day after these pictures were taken, the Allies landed in Normandy. The eventual success at Monte Cassino was completely overshadowed by D-Day. The terrible campaign in Italy was almost forgotten.
We went back in late May after the Poles had taken it. We were offered, whoever wanted to go back to Hangman's Hill to find your own comrades, because no one knew who was killed, whether they'd been taken prisoner. I mean, on both sides, the Germans or us, no one knew who was what. I think we had to cut lots for it because they couldn't take too many, but I went back up over there again, out onto Hangman's Hill, and they were there, lying there, rotting away still. That's what I should always think. Poor men rotting away. It's terrible.
The Battle at Monte Cassino was one of the worst of the war. At times, losses were similar in scale to the battles of Stalingrad and the First World War. Lessons must have been learned from the mistakes made here, but it was at a high cost.
If you are going to attack, you have to approach it differently. Not simply running into the mountain. Even a handful of men could defend these positions. And when there were paratroopers, soldiers with experience in hand-to-hand fighting in the mountains, then it was impossible to break through. We never understood their strategy. It was simply insane.
We must have lost more than 3/4 of the company, really, at the end.
The Battle of Cassino changed me. We went through things that in the normal way no human being can go through or has to go through, thank God. And you can't just cast off something like that. Like taking off clothes or changing a shirt. It stays with you somehow.
You went back to the little hole where you started from. You get down and look round, and no more heads come out. At a bad time. After we got back there and sorted ourselves out and collected as many people as you could and realised just how many casualties you'd had, we were all glad to get away from there.